Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. So today we are jumping headfirst into an absolute epic of a detective story. We're looking at a legendary, completely submerged metropolis. It's this incredibly rare place where ancient, sprawling mythology directly collides with gritty, modern marine archaeology. We are talking about Dwarka, India's lost sunken city. It's a genuinely fascinating journey, and it's going to take us from ancient epic poetry all the way to cutting-edge scientific dating. Okay, let's dive into this with a scene straight out of an ancient apocalypse. The Mahabharata, which is this massive, foundational Sanskrit epic, describes the city's end like this. The sea which had been beating against the shores suddenly broke the boundary. I saw the beautiful buildings become submerged one by one. Now, according to Hindu tradition and sacred texts like the Mahabharata and the Puranas, the original city of Dwarka wasn't just any city, it was built by Lord Krishna himself. But the story goes, the moment Krishna departed the earth, the ocean just rose up and swallowed the entire city whole. And I mean, just look at this staggering, godlike scale of what was supposedly lost here. 900,000. That is the number of royal palaces the ancient texts claim were crammed into Dwarka. And we aren't talking standard brick and mortar. These were supposedly constructed with pure crystal and silver, wonderfully decorated with huge emeralds. The text described this absolutely flawless domain with grand boulevards, massive assembly houses, and coral pillars inlaid with sapphires. It was said to be this incredibly prosperous port, basically serving as the shining gateway to India. But as investigators of history, we have to ask ourselves, how much of this incredible, almost unimaginable opulence is pure myth, and how much is grounded in actual reality? Well, to separate the facts from the fiction, we first need to orient ourselves geographically. We are focusing right on the western coast of India, specifically in the state of Gujarat, out on the Okamandal Peninsula. You can find the modern city of Dwarka right at the mouth of the Gulf of Kutch, and just off the coast from there is the island of Dwarka. Now, because those ancient texts explicitly describe the city hugging the west coast, right where the Gomati River meets the sea, archaeologists naturally zeroed in on this exact region to start their search for Krishna's legendary sunken city. And that brings us to the real-life archaeological quest. Let's walk through this timeline together, kind of like fellow researchers uncovering clues over the decades. The hunt actually started on dry land back in 1963, with H.D. Sankalia doing onshore trench excavations near the modern Dwarkadish temple. He found some really early, promising evidence of ancient walls. Then, in the 1980s, the search finally pushed into the deep. An archaeologist named S.R. Rao led these totally pioneering underwater diving missions. I mean, he essentially brought marine archaeology to India. Fast forward a bit to 2005, and the Archaeological Survey of India intensified everything, revealing even more submerged clusters of artifacts. And you know what? This quest isn't just history. It's incredibly active right now. Looking at 2025, the ASI's Underwater Archaeology Wing is actually launching a major expanded deep water scientific expedition with a full team to map these underwater structures even further. So what did these divers actually find when they went beneath the waves of the Arabian Sea? Well, it wasn't exactly 900,000 crystal palaces, but the gritty reality of these tangible ruins is honestly just as fascinating. Divers discovered massive dressed stone rubble walls, and some of these actually featured L-shaped joints specifically designed to deflect heavy ocean currents. They found these large, triangular, three-holed stone anchors just lying along the seabed. They uncovered rock-cut slipways and stone jetties that would have been used for launching boats, plus these huge, circular defensive bastions built to protect the shoreline structures from the sea's impact. So what we are really looking at here is the heavy, real-world infrastructure of a highly prosperous, ancient, fortified harbor. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what these specific artifacts tell us about the people who lived there. Over on the left, we've got proto-historic pottery, specifically this lustrous red ware and perforated jars that are totally typical of late Harappan sites. But on the right, just look at that incredible seal. It's made from a conch shell and engraved with a three-headed animal. Similar seals have been found at major Indus Valley sites like Mohenjo-Daro. So why is this a big deal? Because researchers believe these seals basically functioned as an ancient passport system. Get this. According to the Mahabharata epic, citizens of Dwarka literally needed a seal to enter or leave the city. Finding this physical seal underwater is one of those striking moments where an ancient text and hard archaeological evidence just perfectly align. Of course, to truly understand the story, we need to know exactly when these artifacts were made. Enter the ultimate forensic tool in our detective story, thermal luminescence, or TL, dating. I know, it sounds super technical, but the concept is brilliant. Think of it like this.
When a piece of ancient pottery was last fired in a hot kiln by a human being thousands of years ago, its internal radiation clock was essentially reset to zero. From that exact moment on, it starts slowly absorbing environmental radiation again. By measuring the stored energy it has absorbed since that initial firing, scientists can calculate its absolute age. It takes all the guesswork out of history and gives us hard, verifiable numbers.
So let's look at the actual data they extracted directly from the scientific reports. Notice that first row of data from the Dwarka Island sites. They found a perforated jar from a site known as BDK-6I, and it has a corrected age of 3,380 years before present, give or take about 490 years. That places it squarely in the late Harappan, proto-historic period. And as you scan down the rest of the table, you see dates from 2,790 years ago right down to about 1,060 years ago. What you should really take away from this is that it definitively proves human habitation in this coastal area wasn't just some brief mythological blip. It actually stretches back in a continuous, proven timeline for over 3.5 millennia. So the crucial point is what this continuous timeline actually means for the city of Dwarka. It wasn't just built once and then destroyed once in some sudden mythical apocalypse. No, the archaeological record reveals a relentless, multi-generational cycle of destruction and rebuilding. In fact, researchers have identified up to 8 distinct settlements at Dwarka over the millennia. Think about that. The first settlement, from around the 15th century BCE, was submerged or washed away. The second one, a few centuries later, suffered the exact same fate. Temples were built, destroyed by storm waves, and then stubbornly rebuilt right directly on top of the ruins of the previous ones. The modern town of Dwarka that stands today is actually the 8th settlement in this incredibly resilient sequence. But why did this keep happening over and over? Let's systematically break down the hard, scientific reality of how parts of this city repeatedly sink. This is where we replace the mythological sudden flood with grounded geological and climatic facts. First off, you have tectonic faults in the region, specifically the Padma-Tirth and Sonamayur faults, that trigger a lot of geological activity. Because of this, the coastal land wedged between these faults actually subsides. It literally drops in elevation. Add to this a gradual, natural rise in global sea levels over the centuries, and finally, throw in severe storm waves that periodically batter the coast. These waves completely inundate those newly lowered settlements. It's this relentless, ongoing combination of geology and oceanography working together against the city.
And this brilliantly illustrates that ongoing battle between the land and the Arabian Sea. Take a look at these ruins near the Kudadost Dargah. What you are looking at right there is a historical period settlement that is fully exposed during low tide. But when the tide comes in, this entire site gets completely submerged by the sea. There's no escaping it. It is living, observable proof of the shoreline changes, the land subsidence, and the sea level rise that have constantly challenged the inhabitants of Dwarka for thousands of years.
Which brings us to a really fascinating comparison. You'll often hear Dwarka casually called the Atlantis of India. But honestly, that is not an accurate comparison at all. Atlantis was a purely philosophical allegory created by Plato. There have been literally 0 physical ruins ever found. Dwarka, instead, is much more like Troy. Troy was a real, highly prosperous ancient city with tangible ruins, which was later intensely mythologized by the epic war poetry of Homer's Iliad. Dwarka was the exact same thing, a genuine, thriving, historic Indian port, a vital gateway for trade, whose very real historical battles with the sea ended up inspiring the epic mythological accounts we see today in texts like the Mahabharata. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question to ponder. How much of our legendary mythology is simply a forgotten chapter of human history, just waiting to be excavated? We started today with a tale of 900,000 crystal palaces swallowed by an angry ocean. And beneath that absolutely fantastic story, we found real stone anchors, actual harbor walls, an ancient passport system, and a 3,500-year-old struggle against tectonic shifts and rising tides. It really makes you wonder what other incredible, grounded truths are hiding right beneath the surface of our oldest stories. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the amazing history around us.